She had lived in poverty her entire life and never believed fate would give her a second chance. When a widow with 2 children bought an abandoned casino for only $170, she thought she had simply found a cheap place to live. But the very next morning, what she discovered inside changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and make sure to comment where you're watching this video from. The desert wind that blew across the trailer park that morning carried the dry, brittle scent of dust and motor oil. The row of faded aluminum homes stood like forgotten relics, their windows clouded and their curtains sun-bleached beyond color. Inside one of them, a woman named Evelyn Harper was finishing her second cup of instant coffee, her eyes on the stack of unpaid bills spread across the small kitchen table. Her fingers traced the paper's edges as if the texture itself could tell her where to find a way out. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock that had long since lost one of its hands. It was 6 in the morning, or maybe 7. She no longer trusted that clock anyway. Her hands were rough from detergent and bleach. Every night, she came home from the diner with her clothes smelling of grease, and after that she still walked to the laundromat down the road for a few more hours of work. 2 jobs, neither paying enough to hold her life together, and yet she clung to them both like a lifeline. The small savings she had left after her husband's death and the divorce had been shrinking faster than she could refill them. Sometimes she thought she could still hear his voice in the trailer, murmuring about better days, though those had vanished long ago, the way the desert swallows up rain after a storm. Her daughter Lily sat on the floor with a sketchbook open, tracing the outline of a chandelier she'd seen once in a magazine. She was 17, tall and quietly radiant, her hair tied in a knot that looked effortless but wasn't. The girl had inherited her mother's patience and her father's sharpness of thought, and when she sketched, her face softened as if she could already see a world beyond these thin walls. Her dream was to design spaces that felt alive, places where people could walk in and forget their troubles for a moment. But for now, her pencils were dull, and the pages of her sketchbook smelled faintly of detergent because they'd been sitting too close to her mother's work clothes. Marcus, her younger brother, had turned 11 that spring. His world was made of screws, wires, and half-broken gadgets he collected from the junkyard behind the park. The boy could spend hours fixing things that no one else cared about: an old transistor radio, a broken toaster, a toy car without wheels. Sometimes, when Evelyn returned home late, she'd find him asleep beside a mess of tools, a small flashlight still glowing beside his cheek. He reminded her of his father in ways that hurt, a boy who built things not because he needed them, but because he believed he could make something work again just by trying hard enough. Outside, a dog barked somewhere near the road. The noise brought Evelyn back to the present, to the cracked surface of her table and the notice pinned above the sink. One from the trailer park's manager, written in red marker: "Final warning. Payment due or eviction in 7 days." She'd read it so many times it no longer made her heart race. It was only another reminder of a truth she already lived with. There wasn't much left to lose. She folded the paper slowly, set it aside, and exhaled. Her car, an aging Ford pickup that coughed each time it started, sat outside like a tired horse waiting for one last run. The gas gauge hadn't touched half a tank in weeks. She had spent the previous night listing small items for sale online: an old sewing machine, a spare coffee maker, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. The offers that came in were laughable, but even the smallest amount could stretch a few more meals, a few more nights of electricity. Yet, beneath the exhaustion and the math of survival, something in Evelyn refused to go still. She had not yet learned how to give up completely. Every night, when the children were asleep, she would sit at her narrow kitchen table with her laptop, scrolling through pages of auctions and estate listings. Most of them were absurd. Mansions beyond imagination, acres of farmland she would never see. But the ritual gave her comfort. It was like peering into lives where the world hadn't fallen apart. That night, as the clock crept past midnight, she found the listing that would change everything. It was buried deep in a government surplus website under a category called Abandoned Properties, Final Sale. The title was short and strange, written in the dry language of official records: Abandoned Casino, Golden Mirage, Property Seized, Unclaimed, Public Auction, Starting Bid $170. At first, she laughed softly. A casino? For less than $200? It had to be an error, but curiosity made her click. The description was brief, almost careless. Structure located off Route 14, formerly known as the Golden Mirage, built circa 1952. Closed after fire damage in 1979. Current condition, hazardous. Buyer assumes all liability. Below it, a single photo, grainy, almost sepia-toned, showed a towering facade, Art Deco in design, with a faded sign that read, "Where luck lives forever." She stared at the screen longer than she meant to. There was something about the building, even in its ruin, that held a whisper of dignity. It was the kind of place she could imagine her husband once talking about, back when he'd dream aloud of running a small business, a repair shop, a garage, anything that could belong to them. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, her pulse beating slower than usual. $170. A risk small enough to be ridiculous and yet large enough to feel like a dare from the universe. She checked the terms again. Transfer immediate upon payment. No back taxes, no current liens. The words might as well have been a lifeline. The next morning, she took the bus into town to speak with a free legal advisor at a local community center. The woman behind the desk wore thick glasses and smelled faintly of lemon polish. When Evelyn showed her the printout, the woman frowned, adjusted her glasses, and said that such properties were sometimes legitimate, old structures forfeited to the state when no heir could claim them. "You'd be responsible for whatever you find inside," she added. "But legally, yes, it's possible." Possible. That was all Evelyn needed to hear. She walked back through the dust with the paper clutched in her hand. The idea grew in her mind during every step. For years, she had been reacting, patching, surviving, waiting. This was the first thing that felt like a decision she could own. The word casino no longer meant gambling or glamour. It meant walls and space and the chance to build something that belonged to her children. That night, she took out the small box she kept under her bed. Inside lay what was left of her savings, rolled neatly into rubber-banded bundles. Her husband's old wedding band lay on top, dull with age. She set it aside, counted the money twice, and then, with a deep breath, sent the payment. The confirmation email arrived a few minutes later. Transaction approved, transfer pending, property, Golden Mirage. The next few days moved like a dream. Lily's skepticism faded when she saw the picture. "We could make it into something beautiful," she said softly, tracing the outline of the broken sign with her finger. Marcus, though too young to understand real estate, was thrilled at the idea of fixing a whole building. For the first time in months, the trailer was filled with conversation that wasn't about bills or repairs. They packed what they could: Blankets, canned food, Marcus's toolbox, Lily's sketchbook, Evelyn's few dresses and work uniforms. The rest they left behind. When Evelyn looked around the small home for the last time, she didn't feel sadness, only the kind of calm that comes when one chapter truly ends. She unplugged the lamp, wiped the counter, and locked the door. The early morning air was cold as they loaded the pickup. The truck groaned but started, coughing dust from its tailpipe. The children climbed in, half awake, half hopeful. In the rearview mirror, Evelyn saw the trailer park recede, the flickering sign by the entrance sputtering once, then going dark. For a moment, it felt like the past itself had lost power. They drove for hours, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. The road shimmered with heat, though the morning was cool. Lily photographed old road signs and half-collapsed gas stations. Marcus counted the carcasses of abandoned cars rusting beside the highway. Evelyn kept her eyes on the horizon, her hands steady on the wheel. The silence between them was not empty now. It was full of expectation. Somewhere past noon, Marcus rummaged through the glove compartment and found an old cassette player that must have belonged to his father. Inside it was a tape labeled simply Mirage. He turned it over curiously. Evelyn took it from him gently, smiled faintly, and set it back. Later, she said, though she wasn't sure why the name made her uneasy. As the sun began to tilt westward, a sign appeared by the roadside, rusted but legible. Cranetown, 45 miles. Lily raised her phone to take a picture, but Evelyn told her not to bother. The desert swallowed names faster than it did rain. Still, she caught the glint of the metal letters, the way Crane looked half erased, as if time itself wanted to forget it. The sky deepened into amber and violet, the light fading as they approached what looked like a cluster of distant shapes rising from the sand. From far away, Evelyn thought it was a mirage, but as they drew closer, the shapes resolved into walls, arches, and a towering sign with letters missing. Golden Mirage. The words gleamed faintly under the dying light, and for a heartbeat she could almost imagine it alive again, music and laughter spilling from its doors. She parked the truck at the edge of the cracked asphalt. The silence was immense. The children stared in awe. Before them stood the husk of what had once been a palace, columns blackened by smoke, windows shattered, the entrance draped in layers of dust. The wind sighed through the broken doors, carrying the faint metallic rattle of a chain. Evelyn stepped out first. The sand crunched under her boots. She ran her fingers along the cool surface of the building, feeling the grain of soot and time. Behind her, the children waited, unsure. She turned to them, her face calm, but her eyes burning with quiet resolve. "This is it," she said. The last sunlight flickered across the ruined sign, catching the gold letters just as the wind shifted. For a brief instant, Golden Mirage shimmered as if waking from a long sleep. Evelyn's breath caught. Whether it was the reflection of the sun or something deeper, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that for the first time in years she felt the pull of possibility, a door she had not yet opened. And somewhere, deep within the casino's walls, the air stirred as if remembering the sound of music long gone. The desert grew still around them, waiting. The past had not yet spoken, but it had begun to breathe again. The next morning broke with a dim, coppery light that bled through the desert haze. Evelyn awoke in the cab of the truck, her neck stiff, her mind fogged with dreams that had evaporated before she could name them. Lily was still asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, a sketchbook clutched to her chest. Marcus had built himself a nest in the back seat, tangled among blankets and an old duffel bag. The air outside was cool for now, but the pale line of heat shimmering over the horizon promised that by noon the desert would burn again. Evelyn stepped out and stretched her limbs, the sand crunching beneath her boots, and looked up at the structure that loomed over them. The golden mirage stood silent and watchful in the early light. Up close, it was both majestic and broken, a wounded animal of steel and glass. The facade, built in the mid-century Art Deco style, still bore traces of grandeur beneath the scars of fire and sand. Sunlight slid along the vertical ribs of its columns, catching on shards of fractured glass. The grand arch over the entrance was carved with fading patterns of suns and feathers, symbols of fortune from another era. The old sign above the doors, "Where Luck Lives Forever," clung to the wall at a crooked angle, the letters half gone, the metal warped. For a fleeting second, the word luck flickered in the wind like a heartbeat before going still again. Evelyn pushed the door and it moved with a groan, the hinges sighing as though in protest. Inside, the air was cool and dry, dense with the scent of dust and something else. Something older, like burned velvet and forgotten perfume. They entered carefully, each footstep echoing. The light from the doorway cut a golden path across the marble floor, catching specks of dust that swirled like tiny ghosts. The first thing they saw was the main hall, vast and frozen in time. Once, this place must have blazed with chandeliers and laughter, with the clinking of glasses and the jingle of coins. Now it was an echo of itself. The ceiling, once mirrored, was cracked and dull. Fragments of glass hung like teeth from its edges. Rows of slot machines stood in perfect stillness, their colors faded to gray. The faces of painted women smiled eternally from the old posters on the walls, their glamour curdled by dust. A grand staircase curved upward from the lobby, its brass railings tarnished but unbroken. Evelyn ran her palm along one of the banisters. It was cold, unyielding, and surprisingly smooth. Somewhere in her chest, beneath the fatigue, she felt the faint tremor of awe. Lily wandered ahead, camera in hand. She began to photograph everything: the cracked mirrors, the collapsed stage curtain, the way the sunlight caught on the remnants of a golden mural behind the bar. To her, this wasn't just a ruin. It was a story, a memory she could rebuild. She crouched near an old chair, tracing her fingers over the faded upholstery, and murmured to herself that the patterns could be restored. For a moment, Evelyn saw in her daughter's eyes the same fierce light she had once seen in her husband's when he talked about fixing cars, the same defiant belief that broken things could still be made whole. Marcus had already vanished deeper into the hall, drawn by the silent army of slot machines. Evelyn called his name, but his voice came back from the distance, full of wonder. He was crouching near one of the machines, brushing dust from its side. The boy had found a casino token, still gleaming faintly under decades of grime. On one side, the inscription read "Golden Mirage, 1979, and on the other, a sunburst symbol with the letter G. He slipped it into his pocket like a secret treasure. Evelyn followed him, her boots leaving shallow prints in the dust. She tried to imagine the last night this place had been alive, the tables full, the band playing, the laughter, the sharp scent of liquor and smoke. She could almost hear it if she let herself listen long enough, the echo of a trumpet from the far end of the ballroom, the murmur of bets placed and fortunes lost. But there was something else, too, under the surface of memory, a faint hum that made her uneasy. The silence in this building was not empty. It was holding its breath. They reached the far end of the hall, where two wide doors led to what had once been the manager's office. The nameplate had long since fallen off, leaving only a pair of rusty screws. The door itself resisted at first, swollen by years of neglect, then gave way with a deep crack. The room inside was smaller than Evelyn expected, the ceiling lower, the windows shattered. A large mahogany desk stood in the center, half collapsed under its own weight. Behind it, the wall bore a long scorch mark that stretched up to the ceiling like a black vein. The smell of old fire was stronger here. On the far side of the room sat a safe, massive and square, built into the floor. The paint on its surface had bubbled and peeled, revealing the raw steel beneath. Evelyn knelt beside it, brushing away the dust. There was no handle, no visible keyhole, only a circular dial fused solid by rust. The air around it was strangely cold, and when she laid her hand on the metal, she felt a faint vibration, as if the building itself was breathing through it. "Mom, what is it?" Lily asked from the doorway, her voice cautious. Evelyn straightened, frowning slightly. "A safe," she said. "Locked for decades, probably. Maybe just full of ashes now." Yet she didn't move away. Something about it unsettled her. The blackened mark on the wall, the half-melted brass lamp beside it, the cracked glass in the windows. It all seemed to circle back to this one point, as though the fire had started right here. They explored the rest of the floor in silence. The walls bore layers of old wallpaper, curling at the edges, faded from gold to gray. In one of the smaller rooms, Lily found a stack of playing cards melted together into a single block, the edges fused like stone. Marcus found a small metal plaque with the engraved words "Private Lounge," authorized personnel only. The letters gleamed faintly, even in the dark. Evelyn pocketed it without thinking. When the sun began to sink behind the hills, the air inside grew colder. They decided to spend the night in the truck again, not yet ready to sleep inside the building. But something about the silence of the desert made the casino's walls seem alive even from a distance. Evelyn sat awake long after the children had fallen asleep, watching the outline of the building under the moonlight. At first, she thought she imagined it, the soft glow that pulsed behind one of the upper windows. It was weak, almost like a reflection. Then it flickered again, bright enough to be seen clearly. One of the signs above the entrance, the one with the word "Mirage," had come to life for a few seconds, burning with a faint golden hue. Evelyn stared, her hand frozen on the steering wheel. There was no power connected to the building. She had checked the fuse box earlier that day. Yet, there it was, an echo of light, glowing as if it had never gone out. She told herself it was the moonlight playing tricks, but deep down she knew better. The old casino was not entirely dead. It was waiting. The next morning, she drove into town to buy supplies: flashlights, gloves, bottled water, and a few tools. The local hardware store clerk, an elderly man with sun-spotted skin, raised his eyebrows when she mentioned the Golden Mirage. "That place?" he said slowly. "You mean it's open again?" She explained that she'd purchased it through the state auction. He gave a short, nervous laugh and told her that most folks around there avoided it. "Used to be the pride of the valley," he said, his voice dropping. "Fire took it down fast. Some said it was cursed even before that. Never found the owner, did they? Name was Crane, or Crane, something like that." Evelyn didn't answer. She paid, thanked him, and left. When she returned, the building looked the same as she had left it, silent and still under the noon sun. But as she stepped inside, she felt a shift in the air, a subtle difference, like walking into a room someone had just left. The dust on the floor near the grand staircase bore fresh footprints that weren't theirs. She crouched, studying them. They led toward the manager's office, then vanished. She glanced up, her heart pounding, but saw nothing except sunlight spilling through the cracks in the ceiling. Lily was upstairs, photographing the ballroom balcony. Marcus was in the lobby, tapping the sides of the slot machines to see which ones still clicked. Evelyn called for them to stay close, though she didn't explain why. By afternoon, they had opened several of the smaller rooms, clearing debris and broken furniture. Lily dusted off a cracked mirror and propped it against the wall. For a brief moment, it reflected the lobby in a way that made the space look whole again, as though time had folded backward. Marcus uncovered a small service corridor behind the main bar, where boxes of melted liquor bottles still stood. The boy pointed out that the fuse box was ancient but surprisingly intact. Evelyn decided they would try to restore a small section of the building, perhaps just one room, to make it livable while they worked. It was too early to plan more than that. The casino was enormous, its halls leading off like veins through darkness. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched, not by people, but by the place itself. That night, after the children had fallen asleep again in the truck, Evelyn returned to the lobby alone. She moved quietly, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The beam passed over the staircase, the rows of machines, the silent piano in the corner. Everything was motionless. And then, just as she reached the manager's office, the flashlight dimmed. She tapped it once, twice, and it flickered back to life, just in time for her to see, in the glass of the broken window, a reflection that didn't belong to her. For the briefest moment, she saw a figure standing in the hallway, a man in a suit, his face indistinct, turned toward her as though watching. The image vanished when she spun around. The corridor was empty. The only sound was the wind pressing softly against the walls. Evelyn's breath came shallow, her heart hammering. She stepped closer to the window, scanning the shadows, but there was nothing. Only her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed. She forced herself to breathe, to steady her hands. This was no haunting, she told herself. It was exhaustion, imagination, tricks of light. Still, as she turned off the flashlight and stood in the darkness for a moment longer, she thought she heard it again, the faint, rhythmic chime of coins fallen into a metal tray. The next morning, when Lily showed her the photos she had taken, one of them made Evelyn pause. It was a shot of the grand lobby taken the day before, the light cutting across the floor. In the far corner, behind the row of slot machines, a blur of motion, too tall to be a reflection, too defined to be dust. A shadow in the shape of a man, standing as though he had never left. Evelyn said nothing to the children. She only told them to keep close as they worked. The golden mirage was waking up, and whatever slept inside its walls was beginning to remember them. The desert morning came slow and heavy, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over the ruins of the golden mirage. Evelyn awoke to the metallic groan of wind scraping against the building's sign, her head resting against the steering wheel of the truck. Her back ached from another night spent half sitting, half dreaming, haunted by the echo of coins and muffled laughter that seemed to drift from nowhere. She told herself it was only the desert wind, but deep inside she wasn't sure. When she stepped outside, the light was pale and cold, painting the casino in muted gold and silver. It stood silent again, a giant carcass of a dream, beautiful in its decay. Lily was already awake, sitting on the hood of the truck, sketching the building from a distance. The air smelled of sand and burnt metal. Her pencil moved quickly across the paper, capturing the cracked facade, the faded letters, the slow, dignified ruin. Marcus crouched near the steps, examining an old coin he had polished the night before. He had discovered that if you rubbed the edge just right, you could still make out faint engravings, small suns circling the letter G. The boy's fascination with the place had only grown stronger. Evelyn could see it in the way his eyes darted constantly toward the doors, eager to continue exploring. After a quick breakfast of canned beans and stale bread, they went inside. The temperature dropped immediately as they crossed the threshold, the casino swallowing sound. Dust particles shimmered in the air, illuminated by the morning light streaming through the cracks. The smell of old smoke lingered, faint but distinct, like the last breath of a long-dead fire. The family set to work cleaning. Evelyn had hired a few local laborers the day before, men from town who were willing to work for cash and didn't ask questions. They arrived with wheelbarrows, gloves, and dust masks, joking among themselves until they saw the building up close. Then their laughter faded. One of them, an older man named Dean, stopped in the lobby and looked up at the ceiling. "I used to play trumpet here," he said quietly, "back when it was all lights and noise." His voice carried a strange tenderness, as though speaking to an old lover. Evelyn listened politely, not wanting to interrupt. Dean told her how the Mirage had been the pride of the valley in the late 50s. People drove from across the state just to see the shows. They said it was untouchable, he murmured, but every place like this hides something rotten behind the shine. He gestured toward the blackened walls and gave a bitter laugh. I guess the fire proved that right. Then he set to work with the others, sweeping debris into piles. While the men worked, Lily moved through the hallways with her camera, cataloging the rooms one by one. She found what remained of a coat room filled with rusted hangers, a narrow corridor leading to what had been the staff quarters, and a staircase that descended toward the basement. She paused at the landing, staring down into the dark. The air rising from below smelled of rust and damp ashes. The walls were lined with scorch marks, but beneath them she could still make out faint decorative stencils, geometric patterns in gold and green, the last traces of the casino's Art Deco elegance. Marcus followed close behind her, flashlight in hand. The boy was fearless, or perhaps too young to understand why he should be afraid. He shined the beam along the floor, revealing scattered poker chips, broken glass, and cigarette butts fossilized in dust. At the end of the hallway stood a heavy door, half sealed by a layer of plaster. Someone, long ago, had bricked it up. Marcus crouched, touching the wall. "This part's newer," he said softly, noticing the different color of the mortar. Evelyn, who had come up behind them, frowned. "Leave it for now," she said. "We'll need proper tools to open it safely." But Marcus kept looking at it as though the wall itself was whispering to him. By afternoon, the workers had cleared much of the main hall. Sunlight now reached the farthest corner for the first time in decades, and the glint of glass fragments on the floor looked almost beautiful. The sound of shovels and brushes echoed through the room, but there was a strange feeling that something else was moving just beyond the edges of perception. A quiet shift of air, a fleeting sound like footsteps retreating down an invisible corridor. Evelyn ignored it. When they stopped for lunch, Dean sat on the steps near the bar and wiped his forehead with a rag. "You know," he said, "there used to be a private room here. They called it the Green Room. Only the owners and a few select men were allowed inside. Some said it wasn't for gambling at all, but for meetings. Deals, politics, things you didn't talk about in daylight. His voice dropped lower. That's where the fire started, right under that section. He pointed towards the northern wall where the bricked doorway led. They sealed it after, didn't they? Makes you wonder what's on the other side. Evelyn felt a chill creep up her spine. She looked at the sealed door again, imagining what might lie beyond. It wasn't just curiosity. There was something deeper, a sense that her family's presence here was no coincidence. Later that evening, as the workers packed up, she wandered into what had been the manager's office again. The smell of burnt wood was stronger than ever. The safe still sat in the corner, unyielding and cold. She knelt beside it, running her hand over the cracked surface. Her fingers caught on something, a piece of metal embedded in the floor near the edge. She pried it loose carefully and found it was the corner of an old photograph frame. Inside, the picture had been nearly destroyed by smoke and time, but the faces were still faintly visible. There were 3 people, 2 men in suits smiling for the camera, and a woman holding a small child. One of the men she recognized immediately. She had seen his portrait earlier that day in a pile of newspaper clippings the workers had found. Howard Crane, the missing owner of the Mirage. The other man, standing beside him, wore a lighter suit and a kind smile. The name written on the back of the photo froze her blood. My partner, Sam Harper, and his family. Her hands trembled slightly. Harper, her husband's name. For a long time she sat motionless, staring at the image as if it might come alive and explain itself. Her husband, Marcus Harper Sr., had rarely spoken of his father. He had mentioned once, offhandedly, that the man had a gift for making people believe in him. But that was all. He'd died young, leaving behind more questions than answers. Evelyn had never thought much of it. Families had their silences. But now those silences were beginning to take shape, forming a shadow that stretched backward into this very building. She slipped the photograph into her pocket and said nothing to the children. Not yet. They were too young to carry that kind of weight. But as she stepped out of the office, she felt a strange pressure in her chest, as if the building itself was waiting for her to understand something. That night, the sky burned crimson over the desert. The workers had gone, and the family sat outside by a small fire near the truck. The casino loomed behind them, half lit by the dying sun. Lily showed her mother the photographs she had taken inside. The images were haunting. The vast empty hall, the peeling wallpaper, the grand staircase swallowed by darkness. Yet, one picture stood out. It showed the lower hallway leading towards the sealed door. In the photo, a faint glow seemed to seep through the cracks in the plaster. It must be the light from my flash, Lily said, though she sounded uncertain. Evelyn nodded, unwilling to voice her thoughts. After the children went to sleep, Evelyn stayed awake, sitting by the fire. The desert was quiet except for the wind whispering through the wires of the old sign. She took the photograph from her pocket again and studied it under the flickering flame. The man beside Howard Crane looked so familiar now. Something in his eyes, the tilt of his head, the way his hand rested protectively on the child's shoulder. It was her husband's face, younger but unmistakable. The fire crackled, sending a wave of sparks into the dark. Evelyn thought of her husband's final days, how he'd become withdrawn, how he'd mentioned needing to set something right. At the time, she'd believed it was grief talking, the aftermath of losing his job, the weight of debts. But what if he had meant something else entirely? What if the past he'd been trying to bury had led straight here, to this casino? She rose and looked toward the building, its windows dark as eyes. Somewhere inside those walls was the truth, sealed away just like that room behind the plaster. Golden Mirage was more than a ruin. It was a ledger of sins and secrets, and her family's name was written in it. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint metallic clinking sound, like coins tumbling onto a table. She turned, but the sound vanished. Only the fire remained, crackling softly. For a moment, she wondered if she was losing her grip on reality, if the desert's emptiness was playing tricks on her mind. But deep down, she knew the mirage was not done with her. In the early hours, she finally climbed back into the truck and tried to sleep, though the unease lingered. Marcus shifted in his sleep, mumbling something about a door and a voice calling from behind it. Evelyn stared at him, her heart thudding. He couldn't have known. She hadn't told him. By the time dawn came, the fire had gone out, leaving only a circle of gray ash. The first light of morning spilled over the casino's facade, casting long shadows that stretched across the sand. The letters on the sign caught the sun again. Golden Mirage. But now, for just a second, Evelyn thought she saw new words flicker beneath the rusted surface. She blinked, and they were gone. When she looked back toward the sealed door inside the building, still dark and waiting, she knew that what lay behind it would change everything. Her husband's silence, her family's curse, the strange coincidences that had led her here. They were all threads of the same story. And the mirage, in its patient, eerie way, was guiding her toward it. The air felt different that morning, charged, restless. Somewhere within the casino's bones, something was stirring, and Evelyn Harper could feel its pulse aligning with her own. She didn't yet know what the past demanded of her, but she understood one thing clearly. The mirage hadn't chosen her by accident. By the time the sun rose again over the endless plains, Evelyn Harper had already made up her mind. She was no longer a visitor or a wanderer among ruins. She was an investigator, an heir to something she didn't yet understand, but could feel growing like a pulse beneath her feet. The photograph she had found the night before burned in her pocket, its presence as heavy as a confession. She had stared at it until dawn, memorizing every smudge and faded contour of her husband's father, Sam Harper, standing beside Howard Crane. The revelation had not frightened her, but it had anchored her. Her husband had been part of this place. His blood, and by extension her children's, was bound to the Golden Mirage. When she entered the casino that morning, she felt as though the building knew her decision. The air was denser, the echoes clearer. Her footsteps on the marble tiles reverberated down the empty corridors like an invitation. Dust motes swirled around her in shafts of light, and for the first time she thought she could smell something other than age and smoke, something faintly metallic, as if the ground itself had begun to exhale. The workers had not yet arrived, but she didn't wait. She went straight to the northern corridor, to the sealed wall that Marcus had discovered. Her son followed her, rubbing his sleepy eyes, still in his wrinkled t-shirt from the night before. "You're really going to open it?" he asked, his voice both eager and uncertain. Evelyn nodded. "We've come too far not to." By mid-morning, the workers were there with hammers and crowbars. Dean, the old musician, stood aside watching, his face pale. He didn't say a word this time. When the first hammer struck the wall, the sound was dull and final. A second blow loosened a brick, and as it fell, a gust of cold air seeped out from the crack, air that had not touched the surface for over 40 years. The smell that followed was unmistakable. Ash, oil, and something almost sweet, like burnt paper. Piece by piece, they removed the bricks until a dark passage yawned open before them. The air grew heavier. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow tunnel lined with concrete and steel. The walls were damp with condensation, the floor uneven with debris. Someone, long ago, had built this place not just to hide, but to last. "Private game room," Dean muttered under his breath, staring into the blackness. That's what they called it? Evelyn felt her throat tighten. The name matched what she'd read in the ledger Lily had found in the office days before. Private game room. Keep cameras on. Those had been the last words written before the fire. She raised her flashlight higher and took the first step inside. The tunnel led to a room larger than she'd imagined, rectangular and low-ceilinged, with the remnants of charred furniture scattered across the floor. 2 large metal tables stood fused to the ground, their surfaces warped by heat. The walls bore the black fingerprints of flames that had long since died. In the corners lay the skeletal remains of chairs and the melted outlines of safes. The room was a tomb of money and betrayal, sealed in silence for decades. As she moved further in, the beam of her light fell upon something metallic protruding from the soot. She knelt, brushed the ashes away, and uncovered a half-melted sign bolted to the wall. The engraved letters were still legible: "Private game room. Authorized access only." She ran her hand over it, her skin prickling. The past was no longer abstract. It was here, tangible, real enough to touch. On the far wall, a large metal cabinet stood, its doors half open, blackened by fire. Inside it were rows of folders, their edges crisped and crumbling but still intact enough to hold meaning. She carefully removed one and opened it on a nearby table. The papers inside were contracts, receipts, and typed lists of names. Many were smudged beyond recognition, but a few remained legible. Names of men who had served in politics, banking, and law enforcement. Next to each were handwritten notes in pencil: approved, paid, delayed. In one of the folders, she found something more personal: a series of photographs showing Crane and Harper shaking hands with a third man whose face had been torn out. Behind them, a group of uniformed waiters carried trays of champagne. She turned the photos over and saw that same lupin handwriting again, elegant and decisive. New investors confirmed. No witnesses. Her pulse quickened. She turned another page and found a letter, half burned at the edges, signed with the initials DR. It was a threat. "You took what was not yours," it read. "You built your fortune on deceit. If the fire doesn't cleanse it, I will." Evelyn read the line twice. The handwriting was sharp and confident, each stroke pressed deep into the page as though carved in anger. A sound behind her made her freeze. It was faint, a scuff of a shoe against metal. She turned quickly, flashlight raised, but saw nothing except the swirling dust. The workers had gone quiet outside, waiting. She steadied her breathing and looked again at the document spread before her. The truth was here, fragmented but alive. The fire had not destroyed it, only buried it deeper. When she finally emerged from the tunnel, the workers looked at her as though she had come back from the dead. She carried the folder against her chest, unwilling to let go. Dean spat into the dirt and said quietly, "Some things are meant to stay sealed." Evelyn ignored him. "And some are meant to be understood," she replied. That afternoon, she returned to the office to check on the safe. It sat exactly where she'd left it, but something about it seemed different. There were faint smudges on the floor near its base, fresh ones, as though someone had been there recently. Her heart quickened. She knelt to examine them. They weren't from her or the children. The pattern was unfamiliar, the sole thicker, heavier. She looked around the room. A faint draft stirred the papers on the desk, though the windows were closed. The sense of being watched pressed down on her again, stronger now, like the weight of unseen eyes in the dark. She locked the door behind her and stood still, listening. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, from somewhere above, a soft metallic sound, a slow, deliberate click, echoed through the ceiling. She turned off her flashlight and waited. The silence returned, but she knew what she had heard. Someone else had been inside the casino. That night, she couldn't sleep. The air outside was restless, the sky heavy with clouds that never broke into rain. The desert seemed to hum faintly, as if alive with static. She sat on the steps outside the casino, staring at the dark horizon. The folder from the hidden room lay beside her, its contents scattered across her lap. Each document, each fragment of handwriting, seemed to vibrate with significance. The names meant nothing to her, yet they formed a network of corruption that must once have reached across the state. She thought of Sam Harper, her husband's father, standing beside Crane in those photographs, smiling. What had he known? What had he done? Had he been part of the deceit or a victim of it? The official records had said he'd vanished after the fire, presumed dead, but now Evelyn began to wonder if that was the truth. Maybe he hadn't died at all. Maybe he had walked away into the desert, carrying secrets no one was meant to know. A sharp gust of wind lifted the edge of one paper and flipped it over. Beneath it, she noticed a faint circular watermark, an insignia of intertwined letters, Emir, with the date 1979 stamped beneath. It appeared on multiple sheets like a signature. Evelyn traced it with her fingertip, realizing that it must have been the casino's private seal, used for internal ledgers. There was something ominous about it now, like a brand burned into the history of everyone who had touched this place. When she finally stood to gather the papers, headlights flashed in the distance, brief, distant, then gone. A car had stopped on the far side of the desert road. She strained her eyes, but saw only darkness. The wind picked up again, carrying with it a faint echo that could have been the slam of a car door. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She waited for the sound of an engine, but none came. Inside the casino, the power still dead, she made her way back to the office. The beam of her flashlight trembled slightly in her hand. On the desk, the photograph she'd found earlier lay face down, though she was certain she'd left it upright. She turned it over. The faces were the same, but something was different. Someone had drawn an X across Howard Crane's face in what looked like charcoal. The mark was fresh. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, scanning the room, the hallway, the ceiling. Nothing moved, yet she could feel the air vibrating around her, heavy with unseen presence. The smell of burnt paper filled her nostrils again. She pressed the photograph flat against the desk and whispered under her breath, "I'm not afraid of you." The building seemed to respond with a faint creak from the upper floors, almost like laughter. The next morning brought no peace. The workers didn't return. Dean had told the others not to come back, muttering that the mirage eats the past and the living both. So it was only Evelyn and the children again. Lily tried to distract herself by sketching the casino's interior, tracing the curves of the staircase and the cracked chandeliers, while Marcus spent the day fiddling with the old radio he had found in a storage closet. He claimed he could get it working again if he replaced a few wires. Evelyn didn't stop him. The boy's focus was a comfort. By late afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled over the desert. The sky turned dark, rumbling, and lightning flashed across the horizon. For the first time, rain began to fall, a rare and almost miraculous thing in that place. The drops struck the casino roof like fingers drumming on metal, washing away decades of dust. Inside, the sound was amplified into a steady roar that echoed through every hall. Evelyn stood in the office, watching the rain through the shattered window panes. The storm light illuminated the safe, the desk, the photograph, all of it trembling faintly under the flicker of lightning. She felt the pull of the secret room again, the tunnel beneath the ground calling her name. But this time, she resisted. She needed to think, to plan. There were too many questions, too many dangers. As night fell, the storm passed, leaving the air clean and strangely electric. The casino dripped quietly, the sound of water falling from broken ceilings like a heartbeat. Evelyn lit a candle and sat down at the desk with the folder of documents. She read every page carefully, piecing together what she could. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, a timeline of meetings, payments, and names, all converging on one date, July 15th, 1979. The day of the fire. In one of the letters, written in Crane's handwriting, she found a line that sent chills down her spine. "If Sam backs out, burn it all." Beneath it, in another hand, someone had added, "He knows too much." Evelyn leaned back in the chair, staring into the flickering light. Her husband's father had not been just a partner. He had been the conscience of the Mirage, the man who wanted to expose its crimes. The fire hadn't been an accident. It had been a purge, and now, 40 years later, she had reopened the wound. Somewhere, deep in the building, something shifted. A faint metallic clang, followed by the creak of a door swinging open. Evelyn rose slowly, the candle trembling in her grip. She stepped into the hallway, listening. The sound came from below near the tunnel entrance. She moved closer, her pulse steady despite the fear. The door to the basement was open, and at the edge of the darkness she thought she saw movement, a flicker of light, like someone carrying a lantern. But when she descended the steps and shone her flashlight, the passage was empty. Only the cold air remained, whispering softly against her skin. The Mirage had its own way of answering questions. It didn't speak in words. It showed her what she was willing to see, and hid the rest. And Evelyn, though shaken, felt a strange clarity settle over her. She was no longer just trying to survive. She was part of this story now, and the truth, whatever it was buried not just beneath the ground, but inside her own bloodline. She turned off the flashlight and stood in the dark for a long time, listening to the slow drip of rainwater from the ceiling. The Mirage seemed to breathe around her, alive again, patient, waiting. The storm outside had passed, but inside its walls, another was only beginning. The next day dawned without warmth. The sun rose over the desert, pale and uncertain, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt in front of the golden Mirage. The storm had rinsed the dust from its facade, revealing patterns and shapes that had been hidden for decades. Water dripped slowly from the eaves, gathering in shallow puddles that reflected the building's broken windows like shards of glass. For a brief, eerie moment, the casino looked almost alive, as if wakened from a long sleep. Evelyn Harper stood at the entrance with her arms folded, feeling the cool air touch her face. She hadn't slept. The thunder had ended hours ago, but the echoes still lived somewhere inside her head, mingling with the voices she thought she'd heard whispering through the halls. She had spent the night in the office, surrounded by the scattered papers from the folder, reading and rereading every surviving word. The pieces of the puzzle were falling together, but the picture they formed was terrible. Her husband's father, Sam Harper, had not been just a victim of the fire. He had been one of the last people inside the Mirage before it burned. The documents suggested that he had uncovered something dangerous, something that had turned the casino from a palace of light into a den of deceit and crime. The letter signed by DR, the contracts with missing signatures, the desperate handwriting near the end of the ledger, they all pointed toward betrayal. Lily appeared beside her mother, rubbing her eyes. "You're up early," she murmured. Evelyn nodded. "Couldn't sleep." The girl followed her gaze toward the darkened interior of the casino. "It looks different today," Lily said softly, "like it's waiting for something." Evelyn turned to her, studying her daughter's face in the morning light. "Maybe it's waiting for us," she replied, though she didn't know if she meant it as hope or warning. Inside, the air had changed. The smell of damp ash and rust was heavier, but beneath it lingered something faintly electric, like the air before lightning strikes. The casino no longer felt deserted. It felt aware. Even the silence had texture now, a low hum that seemed to follow their movements. Marcus was already awake, crouched beside the old radio he had been repairing. He had connected it to a car battery and was fiddling with the wires. "I think I can get it to play," he said proudly. "It's almost working." Evelyn smiled faintly, trying not to show her unease. "Just be careful," she said, though her voice came out weaker than intended. By mid-morning, she left the children upstairs and drove into town. She had questions that needed answers, and there was only one place she could hope to find them: the local archives. The building was small, a squat brick structure that smelled of mildew and dust. Inside, behind a counter stacked with yellowed newspapers, sat a man in a beige cardigan. His name tag read Hollis. When Evelyn explained what she was looking for, he frowned slightly. "The Golden Mirage fire?" he asked. "That's an old story. Most of the files were lost when the city switched systems years ago, but there might still be something in the microfilm records." He led her to a dimly lit room at the back where a humming machine sat beside a stack of reels. As the images flickered across the screen, Evelyn felt as though she were peering into another lifetime. Headlines blurred past until she found the one she was searching for: Inferno at the Golden Mirage. 3 dead, 2 missing. The date read July 15th, 1979. She leaned closer. The article mentioned Howard Crane, the casino's owner, who had disappeared that night, and his business partner, Sam Harper, also presumed dead. There were conflicting eyewitness accounts. Some claimed they saw Crane leaving the building minutes before the fire started. Others insisted both men were trapped inside when the roof collapsed. The coroner's report, preserved in brittle photocopy, listed 3 unidentified bodies recovered from the basement level. Their remains were too damaged to confirm identities. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Her husband had grown up believing his father was one of them. But what if he wasn't? What if he had survived the fire and vanished intentionally? The more she read, the more certain she became that nothing about that night had been accidental. The final clipping stopped her cold. It was a photo, grainy and faint, taken weeks before the fire. It showed Crane and Harper standing in front of the casino, shaking hands with a man Evelyn didn't recognize. The caption read, "Howard Crane and Sam Harper announce expansion of the Mirage property." But the face of the third man, his eyes narrow, his expression unreadable, stirred something deep in her memory. She was certain she had seen him before, though she couldn't say where. When she returned to the Mirage that afternoon, the building felt heavier than before, as though it had absorbed the heat of her discoveries. The moment she opened the door, she sensed that something was wrong. The air was thicker, almost smoky. "Lily? Marcus?" she called, her voice echoing through the lobby. There was no answer. Panic surged through her chest. She hurried up the stairs, her footsteps loud against the cracked marble. She found them in the ballroom. The children were standing near the old stage, staring at something glowing faintly in the shadows. Evelyn followed their gaze and saw the source. One of the slot machines near the back had come to life. Its reels spun slowly, clicking in rhythm, though the power in the building was still disconnected. The screen flickered, and then, with a soft mechanical sound, coins began to drop into the tray, one after another, glinting dully in the half-light. Marcus was transfixed. "I didn't touch it," he whispered. "It just started by itself." Evelyn stepped forward cautiously and reached for the lever. The metal was ice cold. She pulled it gently, and the machine stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Lily swallowed hard. "Mom," she said softly, "I think this place remembers." That night, Evelyn decided to finish what she had started. The answers were buried somewhere within these walls, and she couldn't stop until she found them. She waited until the children had fallen asleep, then returned to the office. The flashlight beam cut across the room, catching the edge of the safe. She had avoided it for days, afraid of what she might find inside, but now she was ready. The combination dial was fused by rust, but the hinges looked weak. She grabbed the crowbar she'd brought from the truck and wedged it beneath the edge. The sound of metal groaning filled the room. She pushed harder until something inside snapped with a loud crack. The door swung open. Inside was a stack of charred envelopes, a few pieces of jewelry melted into lumps, and a small metal box engraved with the initials AER. She lifted it carefully and set it on the desk. The lock was broken, but the lid resisted for a moment before giving way. Inside were bundles of old bills, brittle and yellowed with age, and beneath them a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly. It was a map, a rough sketch of the casino's basement, drawn in pencil with a line leading to an area labeled Sub-Level Private Access. At the bottom, in faint handwriting, were the words, "In case of emergency." Evelyn traced the line with her finger. It led to a space that didn't exist on the current floor plan. The basement she had seen so far ended at the private game room. But this map suggested another chamber, deeper underground. Her pulse quickened. It was possible that the missing room had survived the fire intact, sealed off like a tomb. She glanced again at the initials on the box, KR. Could they stand for Crane? The name on the sign she had passed on the way to the casino, the town's forgotten founder, or perhaps they belonged to someone else entirely. Howard Crane's real name had been rumored to have variations. Maybe KR was another mask he had worn. The possibilities twisted through her mind like smoke. When dawn broke, Evelyn was still awake. The candle had burned down to a pool of wax, and the first light of morning filtered through the cracked window. She stepped outside for air and found the sky streaked with gray clouds. Her reflection in a puddle near the steps startled her. She looked older, the lines around her mouth deeper, her eyes darker. The mirage was consuming her piece by piece. Later that day, she gathered the children and showed them the map. "There's another room," she said, "beneath the basement. It might explain everything." Marcus's eyes widened. "Like a secret vault?" Lily frowned. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't go down there. What if it's dangerous?" Evelyn hesitated. She knew her daughter was right, but the need to uncover the truth was stronger than fear. "We'll be careful," she said, "but we have to know." Together, they returned to the basement. The tunnel still smelled of soot and damp stone. Evelyn led the way with a lantern, the map clutched in her hand. Following the drawing's directions, she found a section of the wall that looked newer than the rest, a patch of concrete smoother and lighter in color. She tapped it with the crowbar. It sounded hollow. Marcus helped her chip away at the edges until the outline of a door emerged. The hinges were buried deep, but after several hours of work, they managed to break through. Behind the wall lay a narrow staircase spiraling downward into complete darkness. The air that drifted up from below was colder than she expected, thick with the scent of oil and metal. Evelyn took a deep breath and descended. The steps creaked under her weight. The passage ended in a small chamber lined with steel panels. At its center stood another safe, larger than the first, sealed shut with layers of melted metal. Beside it was a wooden crate, half burned but still intact. She pried it open and found several reels of magnetic tape, their labels faded but readable. On one, scrawled in trembling handwriting, were the words, "Crane, Harper, night of July 15th. Her hands shook as she lifted it. She had no player to test the recording, but she didn't need to. She understood what it was, a record of that final night. Proof. Maybe even a confession. As she stood there, the lantern flickered, then went out. Total darkness swallowed her. She fumbled for matches, her heart hammering. Somewhere behind her, something moved, a soft scrape of metal on metal. She froze, holding her breath. The sound came again, closer this time, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the echo of her own movements. Someone, or something, was down there with her. She turned and ran, clutching the reel to her chest, stumbling up the stairs as the air behind her seemed to shiver. When she reached the main hall, she collapsed against the wall, gasping. The lantern flickered back to life as if mocking her fear. She looked around, but the casino was still, empty except for the rain dripping through the ceiling. The only sound was her own breathing. Later, when she finally played the tape using an old projector she found in one of the storage rooms, the noise it made was barely decipherable. Crackling static, muffled voices, and beneath it all, the unmistakable roar of fire. But, through the distortion, a few words emerged, clear enough to pierce her heart. A man's voice, steady, tired, familiar, said, "We can't hide this anymore, Howard. If it burns, it burns." Then another voice, colder, replied, "Then let it. It's the only way to erase the evidence." Evelyn turned off the player, her hands trembling. She knew that first voice. It belonged to Sam Harper. She sat there in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. The fire had not been an accident. It had been a deliberate act, a final reckoning between two men who had built their fortune on lies. Her husband's father had tried to stop it, and paid the price. Outside, the wind began to rise again, moaning through the broken windows. The mirage groaned as if remembering the flames that had once devoured it. Evelyn stood looking out into the vast emptiness of the desert and whispered, "It's not over." The mirage did not answer, but in the stillness that followed, the faint smell of smoke drifted through the halls once more, as though the fire that had started 40 years ago had never truly gone out. The desert night lay heavy and motionless around the mirage, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Evelyn Harper sat alone at the edge of the ballroom, the old tape still spinning silently inside the projector, its reels slowing to a halt. The sound had long since faded, leaving behind only the faint buzz of static, but her mind refused to release what it had heard. Those two voices, the calm defiance of Sam Harper and the cold, final tone of Howard Crane, echoed through her thoughts like ghosts. She could still hear the fire beginning in the background of that recording, could still sense the fear threaded between the words. Sam had tried to save the truth, and Crane had tried to erase it. In the end, both had been consumed. She sat in the dark long after the machine stopped, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed them together. Somewhere, deep in her chest, was a quiet, rising certainty that the mirage was not finished revealing itself. Every secret she had uncovered seemed to lead to another, each deeper and more tangled than the last. The sealed chamber beneath the basement, the reels of tape, the strange initials on the box, all of it felt like fragments of a single confession, one that the casino itself was forcing her to hear. When dawn came, it arrived weak and colorless. The light struggled through the broken windows, landing in thin streaks across the warped floorboards. Lily and Marcus found their mother sitting by the projector, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Marcus spoke first. "Did you find out who started the fire?" he asked. Evelyn turned toward him slowly, her voice hoarse. "I did. But it's not just about the fire. It's about what they were hiding here. This place was more than a casino. It was a vault, for money, for lies, for people's souls." She stood and looked towards the staircase that led down to the basement. "And I think there's still one more secret buried down there." The map she had found in the safe the night before lay spread out on the desk, its lines now familiar to her. Every hallway, every stairwell she had already explored was marked in smudged pencil, but one area remained blank, a space drawn without detail, as if whoever made it had hesitated to name what it contained. "Sublevel, private access," the words read. The final trace of handwriting below it seemed almost like a warning, in case of emergency. By noon, the heat had returned, pressing against the walls of the building like a weight. The children helped her gather what they needed: lanterns, a crowbar, ropes, and a spare battery for the flashlight. Marcus was eager, his small hands restless with anticipation, but Lily hesitated at the top of the basement stairs. "Mom, what if there's something dangerous down there?" Evelyn paused, meeting her daughter's gaze. "There is," she said quietly, "but pretending it isn't won't make it go away." The descent into the basement felt longer than before. The air grew cooler with each step, thick with moisture and the faint metallic scent of rust. The walls seemed to close in around them, their concrete surfaces slick with condensation. When they reached the bottom, Evelyn lit one of the lanterns and held it high. The flame threw trembling shadows against the walls, revealing the familiar outline of the private game room, and beyond it, the new door they had uncovered the day before. The doorway gaped open now, leading to the hidden stairway that spiraled deeper into the ground. She went first, the children following close behind. The steps were narrow and uneven, worn smooth by time. Every sound, their breathing, the scrape of shoes against metal, echoed like a whisper. The air grew colder still, almost unbearable. When they reached the bottom, Evelyn felt as though they had stepped into another world. The chamber was unlike any part of the casino they had seen. The walls were lined with steel panels that gleamed faintly under the light. Wires ran across the ceiling like veins. At the center of the room stood a massive vault door, circular and sealed, its surface blackened by heat but otherwise intact. Beside it sat a rusted control panel and a desk covered in soot. Scattered across the floor were the remnants of papers, twisted metal, and something that looked like melted plastic. Marcus approached the control panel, his curiosity overpowering his fear. "It's still connected to something," he said, tracing the wires with his fingers. Evelyn touched the vault's surface. It was cold, colder than the air around it, as though the steel itself rejected the warmth of the world above. She felt the same vibration she had once felt from the smaller safe in the office, a low hum, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat. Lily, meanwhile, was examining the desk. She brushed away the layer of soot and found a stack of folders, their covers burned but their contents still legible. The first was filled with accounting sheets, the second with lists of names, and the third with typed memoranda marked confidential. She opened one and began to read aloud. Meeting notes, April 1979. Subject, expansion of storage facilities. Approval granted by HC and SH secondary compartment to be restricted access. Entry code known only to Crane and Harper. She stopped, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom, this room, this vault, it was theirs." Evelyn took the folder from her and scanned the rest of the pages. The final entry was brief. Project suspended until fire suppression upgrade complete. Temporary closure approved by both partners. Records to remain sealed until relocation. Beneath that, in a darker, slanted hand, someone had added, "or until it all burns." A cold shiver ran through her. She turned back to the vault door. It was possible, she realized, that Crane had built this room to hide something that couldn't be destroyed by fire. Money, evidence, or perhaps something even more dangerous. The door had survived the flames. Whatever lay behind it had been waiting ever since. Marcus found a small keyhole near the edge of the vault. "It needs a special key," he said. Evelyn froze. The memory hit her all at once. A small brass key she had found days ago, the one engraved with the letters KR. She pulled it from her pocket, its metal glinting faintly in the lantern light. It fit perfectly into the slot. "Mom, wait," Lily said, stepping forward. But Evelyn was already turning the key. There was a deep, echoing click, followed by a slow metallic groan as the door began to shift. Dust and cold air spilled out in a single breath, heavy with the smell of oil and decay. The hinges protested, then gave way entirely, revealing the darkness within. The lantern's light caught on something metallic inside, a wall of safety deposit boxes, each marked with initials. The air was stale, untouched for decades. On the far side of the room stood a table covered in sealed envelopes and reels of magnetic tape identical to the one Evelyn had already found. She stepped inside, her every movement stirring the dust into thin spirals. Lily followed, shining her flashlight around the room. There were crates stacked against the back wall, some half-burned, others intact. She pried one open and gasped. Inside were stacks of cash, wrapped in paper bands stamped with the Mirage's emblem. Another crate held gold coins, old enough to bear the tarnish of history. But it wasn't the money that made Evelyn's heart stop. It was what she saw beside it. A metal cabinet, scorched but still standing, contained folders marked with dates and government seals. She opened one and found photographs, grainy black and white images of men in suits exchanging envelopes, shaking hands, their faces tense. Many of the names on the attached documents matched those she had seen earlier in the ledgers upstairs. The Mirage had been more than a casino. It had been a conduit, a front for laundering money through political and criminal networks. The fire hadn't been a tragedy. It had been an erasure. "Mom," Lily whispered, "we should take this to the police." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, not yet. If we hand this over without proof of what really happened, they'll just bury it again. Someone wanted this gone for a reason. She gathered the folders into a single stack and tied them with a piece of cord. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. This was something closer to purpose. Marcus was still exploring, his flashlight sweeping across the walls. "There's something else here," he said suddenly. In the corner, half hidden behind a collapsed section of the ceiling, was a smaller safe, old, unmarked, its lock melted shut. Evelyn approached it, feeling that same strange hum beneath her feet. She could almost sense the weight of what lay inside, as if the air around it vibrated with memory. She picked up a piece of metal from the floor and began prying at the lock. The sound echoed like thunder in the confined space. When it finally cracked open, she drew in her breath sharply. Inside, wrapped in layers of burned cloth, lay a collection of personal effects: a wristwatch, a lighter engraved with the initials SH, and a small photograph protected by glass. She lifted it gently. It was the same image she had found before, the one of Crane, Harper, and the unnamed woman with the child. But this copy was clearer. The woman's face was visible now, and Evelyn recognized her instantly. It was her husband's mother. The child she held was her husband. The realization struck her like a physical blow. The vault wasn't just a place of business. It had been a part of their lives, their family's foundation and destruction both. Sam Harper hadn't simply died here. He had been trying to protect them, to preserve the truth that Crane had tried to burn away. The thought filled her with a deep, burning grief that felt heavier than anger. She knelt beside the safe, clutching the photograph to her chest. The silence in the room thickened. Then, from somewhere behind her, a faint noise, a single footstep broke through. She turned, her heart leaping. In the doorway stood a shadow, tall and still, its outline softened by the lantern's light. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then the figure stepped forward, and she saw that it was no ghost but Dean, the old worker who had once warned her to leave. "I told you not to open it," he said, his voice trembling with a strange mix of awe and fear. "You shouldn't have come this far." Evelyn rose slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You knew about this," she said, "didn't you?" Dean shook his head. "Not all of it. Just enough to know that Crane wasn't the only one who wanted it buried." He looked around the room, his expression haunted. "This place, it's poison, Mrs. Harper. It killed everyone who tried to control it. Don't let it take you too." But it was already too late for warnings. Evelyn could feel it, the inexorable pull of truth, the way the mirage seemed to draw its chosen few into its depths. She turned back to the vault, her voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to own it," she said. "I'm here to end it." They carried the folders and the photograph back upstairs. The air seemed lighter now, as though the building itself had exhaled. In the lobby, the fading sunlight poured through the windows, washing the walls in gold. For the first time since she had arrived, the mirage didn't feel haunted. It felt emptied, released. That night, as the children slept in the truck outside, Evelyn sat alone on the steps, the desert stretching endlessly before her. The photograph rested in her lap, the faces frozen in time. The past had revealed its secrets, and though they were terrible, they had also brought clarity. The fire that had once destroyed everything had failed to burn away the truth. It had only hidden it, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to dig it out. The stars shimmered faintly overhead, and the wind moved softly through the broken sign, carrying with it the faintest trace of melody, like music from a forgotten era. Evelyn listened until it faded. She knew what she had to do next. The Mirage's story was not over, but it no longer belonged to the shadows. Tomorrow she would bring it into the light. When the first light of morning touched the horizon, the desert glowed with a soft, muted gold that reminded Evelyn Harper of the faded letters still clinging to the casino's facade. The wind had quieted, the endless moan of sand and air replaced by a stillness that felt almost sacred. The night before had been long, too long, but when she stepped outside the next morning, she felt lighter, as if the mirage itself had finally unclenched its hold on her. The sun spread across the building, bathing its walls in color, and for the first time since she had bought it, the casino looked less like a ruin and more like a promise. Inside, the silence was no longer oppressive. It carried a strange peace, a sense that something old and restless had been laid to rest. The vault had given up its secrets. The evidence she had uncovered, the tapes, the photographs, the ledgers, all of it sat neatly packed inside a battered suitcase near her feet. It was proof not only of corruption and greed, but of courage too. The courage of a man who had tried to expose the truth even when it cost him everything. Sam Harper's voice still echoed in her memory, defiant and weary, telling Crane that some things couldn't be hidden forever. Evelyn felt that she had finally fulfilled that promise for him. When Lily and Marcus awoke, they found their mother standing by the steps of the casino, her hands resting on the old signpost. The letters Golden Mirage shimmered faintly in the rising light, their color half erased but their shape proud and unbroken. Marcus climbed up beside her, his small hands gripping the railing. "Is it over now?" he asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. "No," she said, "but it's beginning again, this time the right way." They spent the morning cleaning the entrance, sweeping away the last remnants of ash and debris that the wind had carried from the night before. The desert had always been indifferent to what humans built or burned, but now, for the first time, it felt as if the land itself approved of their presence. By midday, the building's front steps were clear, and the once dark glass doors reflected the sky. Evelyn paused for a moment, staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the same one who had arrived here weeks ago. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but there was strength there now, something steady and enduring. Later that afternoon, a white pickup truck appeared at the edge of the property, raising a trail of dust. A man stepped out, a county official, judging by the papers in his hand. He looked uncertain, his gaze darting between the building and the family standing before it. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "I'm told you've reopened a closed site." His tone held the cautious politeness of someone unsure whether to admire or reprimand. She met his eyes calmly and handed him the folder she had prepared. "I'm not reopening it," she said. "I'm restoring it. And I have proof that this property was wrongfully abandoned." The man flipped through the papers, his brows furrowing as he saw the notarized documents, the original ownership contract bearing the signatures of Howard Crane and Sam Harper, the missing legal addendum that gave her husband's family equal claim. It was all legitimate. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. "Buried," Evelyn said simply, "right where they tried to hide it." He didn't question further. Instead, he nodded and promised to file the claim. For the first time in decades, the Golden Mirage had a rightful owner again. News traveled faster than Evelyn expected. Within a week, local journalists arrived, their cameras flashing, their questions sharp and insistent. They wanted the story. The widow who bought an abandoned casino for $170 and uncovered a scandal buried for 40 years. She told them only what mattered, that the fire had been no accident, that her husband's father had died trying to expose the truth, and that she intended to turn the ruins into something new. When they pressed for more detail, she refused to sensationalize it. "This isn't about crime," she told them. "It's about redemption." The footage aired that evening on the local news. The next morning, a handful of curious townspeople came to see the building for themselves. They walked through the once empty halls, whispering to one another, tracing their fingers over the cracked marble. Some of them remembered it from their youth, the concerts, the laughter, the glow of the chandeliers. An old woman wept quietly in the lobby, saying she'd met her husband right there by the roulette tables in 1958. It was strange, Evelyn thought, how easily people forgave the past when given a reason to believe in it again. The following days blurred into motion. Volunteers offered to help with the cleanup. A few local businesses donated paint, tiles, even furniture. A retired electrician offered to restore the wiring, laughing that he'd probably installed it the first time around. Evelyn worked alongside them, her hands raw and blistered, her clothes perpetually stained with dust. But each day the building transformed a little more. The cracked walls grew smooth under new plaster. The windows, once opaque with grime, began to shine again. Lily took charge of the interior design, sketching ideas late into the night. Her notebooks filled with drawings of what the Mirage could become, a hybrid of past and present, Art Deco lines softened with natural light and modern colors. She wanted the ballroom to be a community space, a place where people could gather again, not to gamble, but to celebrate. Marcus, meanwhile, tinkered endlessly with the old slot machines and lights, rewiring them until they glowed softly in test mode. No longer tools of greed, but quiet tributes to their history. It was hard work, but it was good work, the kind that built something lasting out of ruin. For Evelyn, each brushstroke and hammer blow felt like an act of healing. Every corner they restored silenced a ghost. Sometimes, late at night, she still heard the echo of the past, the clink of glass, the murmur of voices, but it no longer frightened her. The sounds had lost their bitterness. They were memories now, folded neatly into the walls. When the day of the grand reopening finally came, the desert was cool and clear, the sky an endless expanse of blue. The sign above the entrance had been repaired, its gold letters gleaming under the afternoon sun. Golden Mirage Cultural Center. The new name felt right. It honored what the building had been while freeing it from what it had done. Guests began arriving just before sunset. Neighbors, workers, reporters, even a few officials from the county. They filled the lobby with quiet awe, admiring the restored chandeliers and the polished marble floor. Music played softly from the restored piano near the stage, a slow jazz tune that seemed to float through the air like a benediction. For the first time in 40 years, the Mirage was alive again. Evelyn stood at the top of the staircase watching the crowd. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and pride. When the room grew still, she stepped forward and began to speak. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady, carrying through the hall without effort. "When I first came here," she began, "this place was nothing but ashes and silence. It was supposed to be forgotten. But I believe some places choose their own way of surviving. The Mirage was built on lies once, but it doesn't have to end that way. Today, it stands for something else, for truth, for work, and for starting again." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the lights. She looked out at the faces before her, the workers who had helped her rebuild, the townspeople who had once feared the place, and her 2 children standing near the front, their eyes shining with pride. "This building isn't just mine," she said finally. "It belongs to everyone who believes that what's broken can still be mended." Applause filled the room, loud and genuine. Lily took her mother's hand, and Marcus hugged her waist. For a moment, Evelyn let herself breathe, really breathe, feeling the weight of everything she had endured finally lift. As night fell, the sign outside came alive with light. The golden letters burned softly against the dark, steady and unblinking. From the highway, travelers could see it gleaming on the horizon like a beacon. Some might think it was only a building, another attempt to revive what time had taken. But to Evelyn Harper and her children, it was proof that even the most cursed places could be reborn. Later, when the guests had gone and the last notes of music faded into quiet, Evelyn stood alone in the lobby. The lights dimmed one by one until only the soft glow of the chandeliers remained. She looked around, tracing the lines of the architecture, the restored murals, the faint shimmer of polished brass. The mirage no longer whispered to her as it once had. Its voice had settled into something like peace. She walked towards the main doors and stepped outside. The desert stretched before her, endless and silver under the starlight. A warm breeze brushed her face. For the first time since she had come to this place, she felt no fear of what lay beneath its floors, no dread of the shadows that had once ruled it. The secrets had been unearthed, the truth spoken aloud, and the building had given back its silence. In the distance, she could hear Marcus laughing softly with Lily, the 2 of them talking about their plans for the future, the exhibits they would open, the events they would host. Their voices carried across the open space, bright and full of hope. Evelyn smiled. The sound of their laughter was the truest restoration of all. Before she turned to go back inside, she looked up one last time at the sign above the doors. The words "Golden Mirage" shone steadily against the dark, as though lit from within. It no longer stood for illusion or greed. It stood for endurance, for renewal, for the quiet strength of those who refused to give up. As the wind moved softly through the empty parking lot and the stars gathered over the desert, the mirage seemed to breathe once more, not as a ghost of its former self, but as something entirely new. And Evelyn Harper, standing there in the doorway with the scent of desert rain still clinging faintly to the air, knew that the fire, which had once destroyed everything, had finally burned itself clean. The past was ash, but from its remnants, something living had begun again. If you were captivated by this story, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications. There are more unbelievable true-style mysteries waiting for you. Watch our next videos to uncover more hidden secrets, lost treasures, and shocking discoveries that the world almost forgot. And don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with friends and family so they can experience the twist everyone's talking about. Stay tuned. The next story will leave you speechless.